certainly 1820 or certainly 1400, right, is exponentially greater, right? Everything again in the room as you describe. I mean, think about all the lighting, etc. Right? Would simply be not just unachievable but unimaginable, right? And that is actually the world I would like to see my great-grandchildren live in, where there is so much energy that it's almost hard for me to imagine, right, the possibilities of what their life truly is, right? And now, will that energy still have a cost? It will, right? But it will be a relative cost to these much higher consumption gradients.
Right. You're going to have advancements in the way energy is produced, the way it's transferred between wherever it's produced and how it's consumed. You're going to have things that consume that energy that are going to be more efficient and potentially need less energy. Just as far as the rate there. It's definitely interesting thinking about how all those things come into play. And right now it seems like the overall consensus is use less energy, don't drive your car if you don't need to, don't have a Hummer, you never see those on the road anymore. And it's because energy now is viewed as something that if you use too much of it, if you have too many cars on the road, you're going to deplete the ozone layer, you're going to create more global warming, all these different things. So does it make sense for whoever is also trying to push more energy forward, or producing more energy forward, whether it's nuclear or whatever it is, to also in the same time have to fight this battle of energy seen as this bad thing that is going to make this world, evaporate?
Sure.
A fiery hellscape.
Yeah, understood. And not necessarily to get down to the climate side of thing, but I think sometimes there's a confusion on the celebration of energy more generally, right? And that is that is kind of the confusion to me around the idea that the global experience, or I guess the localized, the more you think about it, the more nonsensical it sounds to me. It's like we as a world, right, already use enough energy, right? Or positive differently, right? Sometimes it's kind of this idea that in the developed world, we use too much energy, right? Okay, and in the undeveloped world, right, they don't have as much energy as the developed world, but there's always an asterisk against that, being that, well, we don't actually want the undeveloped world to start using too much energy. It's always, but the idea again is access to energy should be celebrated, full stop, because it is more often than not the ability always to raise quality of life, right? It is the ability to enact real solutions, right? That do happen, right? And happen with more often than not access to greater amounts of energy, right? Meaning that if you want to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, right? The best way in my mind to do that is to have a heck of a lot of energy, right? And pull it out by the billions of metric tons per year, right? And in the wrong way to think about it would be, wow, let's constrain myself with the caloric resources I presently have, because that's just going to constrain your imagination to the possible, to solve this problem,
to create, exactly,
yeah.
It's like a loop in itself.
Sure.
And it's not saying that but I mean, there's no way to regulate that. There's no way to say, okay, these group of people get to use X amount of energy, because of kind of what we were saying earlier is that those solutions can come out of, places that are unknown, right?
Sure.
I mean, the television was the younger boy who invented it, because I think he was like a physicist, but he lived on his parents' farm, and he was looking at the row of cornfields. And that's where he got the idea for the television and the pixels. But I think there was someone else who also had invented it in a different state or town or whatever, and they kind of came head to head. But you could assume that you're going to have the Edisons and those type of people that are going to create these things. But I think today's society has shown us more and more and over that great things can come from everyday people. And I don't think it's because back then people weren't able to think that way. I think it's now there's more opportunity to, if you do have an idea, if you do have a vision for something, there's a way for you to scale it, to get it out there. Right? The ease of going to market with a product, creating a new business or whatever it might be, is a lot more efficient today than it was previously. Right? If we were to do this podcast, I don't know, in the 1950s or something, it's possible that you would have a similar, a similar type of environment like this, but then where does that information go on, right? Here we plug in the USB.
Sure.
That reads its information. You put it in your pocket. You walk home. You upload it, and the whole world can see. Back then, I'm not sure exactly. Well, just also the distribution, right? Like, let's say you were to create something like this, and you wanted to get it on TV. It's almost impossible, right? Because who are you competing against? There's no internet. There's no YouTube. There's no way to. You couldn't almost learn certain things, have access to certain things, whereas today you have the best minds who upload information a lot of times for free to build their own platform, vanity or charity, whatever you want to call it, and you're literally sitting down and getting in the minds of some of these great people. So thinking about removing all those barriers, right? So maybe in the future, there's the need to work on menial things are all solved by a form of energy, right? Which could be like an AI machine that is able to take care of many of the physical issues you have. So you can spend more time in your own head kind of pushing things forward and ideas and things like that. But then there's also the question is there a point where AI becomes self-aware, is able to reflect, is able to say, these are the issues that I have that I recognize in myself, and I'm going to go and then solve all those issues extremely quickly. So it's almost like you start the program, it says, hello, I'm going to fix an issue around here. You go to bed, you wake up, and it's solved every cancer, every issue that is presented in the world because it's able to process not only the information, like humans are limited by the information you know and you can recall, right? And then what you can conjure up. But then an AI who can then reference, let's say, every book ever written and a blink of a second, and then use the important aspects of it. How quickly do you solve problems? So, maybe we're coming to this moment where something like that does exist, and you have society before this minute that is viewed in one way. And then after the minute of it computing all of these solutions, well, that's the problem. You have humans that are the resistance.
Not even resistance. Yeah. You had a bandwidth limitation, right, on the human side.
Yeah, potentially. But well, no, you're right 100%. But there are different people who can make actionable steps to fix those things, right?
Sure.
So if I don't know, I mean, maybe it's like an AI assistant that's in your head and you just say, how do I best solve this issue, and it'll process it through its systems.
Sure.
Right. And then that would look so different from, I think, everything you see today, which is like totally, it's going to look so dumb, like everything around us except, we're here, right? There's a light. It's photons, right?
Right.
You've got a camera that's capturing light, and you've got computers over there that are processing everything, right? But there's so much in here that's really dumb, right? This wall is pretty dumb, right? This table, these chairs. Does it need to be smart? That's one question. But if we have energy that we don't know what to do with, and you have a chair that's the same price, but it gives you data on where it's positioned in the room
Sure.
at what time. So when you leave, it positions itself to make more room for another activity and knows you're going to be doing in half an hour, right? Or same thing with the table, whether it moves or blah, blah, or if it knows that, hey, you guys are having drinks, right? And we have ice here to keep it cool. But if this was like a special material that could be heated and cooled in different areas, and it knew, hey, Steven is sitting there, he typically has his drink a few degrees off from his center point, whatever, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then wherever that glass touched the table, it was cooled or heated depending on what it was, right? And maybe you could pick it up because it knows how you sip your coffee.
Which would be exciting. And it would also require the table to have access to greater amounts of energy than it has right now.
Right.
Which, within the context of the table itself, is probably nothing, right? Interesting.
Probably not. It's dumb, right? And I'm not saying dumb like stupid. I'm saying dumb just like not very advanced, which maybe is fine for now, right?
Yeah.
So, well, and then you think about, let's say I do have a lot of energy, and what's more interesting is not dealing with the limitations of this physical world, but instead giving yourself a boost by putting yourself in a digital world where you can, let's say you understand how to speak to the brain through like some kind of program, right? And put yourself into some kind of simulation where you can just imagine totally different realities, but that totally break rules of the physics we have here or the limitations we have here.
Yep.
Is it easier to create extremely abundant energy, or is it easier to create a program that would allow you to perceive to have that ultimate energy, right? Limited energy, right? So I also wonder, like, let's say you could do that. You probably for the first few times would like go batshit crazy or like just nuts and do all of these crazy experiments. Like, what if humans could fly, right? Remake, my life, but assuming you could fly instead of take the subway or cars or whatever. And then how would the world look differently just by tweaking like that one thing in humankind, right? But I think after a while, you'd probably go to something that was kind of boring that you could find excitement in. Maybe, or maybe you would just be like some playboy Hugh Hefner for 400 years, but you'd probably get bored. But
Right.
But I'm saying you could do that with a lot of energy if you had a lot of energy to compute a lot of those things and balance that.
Sure, and I mean, but even if bringing it back to the physical, right? With a lot of energy, one can begin to push further things like warp drive or force fields or tractor beams or what we consider replicators. So not to go down the whole like Star Trek pantheon, but all of these we would recognize would require an enormous amount of energy, right? To even attempt, right? And that's why. That's why we should really celebrate the idea of if humanity could achieve access to greater and greater and greater amounts of energy, right? That is, I've always been a little skeptical if you could truly transport a person, right? But certainly the ability to beam inanimate matter from one place to another would sound really, really exciting. But again, it would require enormous amounts of energy, right, to do something like that, to deconstruct, reassemble, and tunnel, and however you're doing it, right? Yeah. So why not?
And a lot of those things, like when you initially hear them, you'd probably say, "Where do you even start? How does that happen?" But there's so much that we see as commonplace today that we probably don't fully understand, right? I know that in gas cars there's the combustion engine and there's some kind of thing that happens with I don't understand all those things, but when I get in a car and I turn it on and I hit the gas, it goes forward, right? And there's more complex things that happen there that smart people have figured out, so you don't have to think about it I mean, if there's that much energy and you could develop things of that nature, I think that'd be incredible.
And even in the short term, if we talk about, the idea of artificial gravity, meaning within a space environment, gravity that's not necessarily centrifugal in its, the manner by which, so you don't need to spin a ship, right? You can have, gravity-based deck plating, right? I think it's a little bit beyond our present physics, but I would be surprised if it's a low energy solution, right? And but the potential there would be huge, right? One, if one can safely travel through space at one Earth gravity, physiologically that's what we've been designed to do, right? Or make micro adjustments. I don't know. Inversely, maybe in your house where as you get older, you kind of turn down the gravity in the same way you kind of turn down that's a cool application,
or,
right?
What about when you go to bed? Like, why do you need a bed? You just have a padded room and you just turn it on.
Well, one could make the argument that sleeping in a proper gravity environment is still good for blood circulation, right?
Yeah,
but one could also
say,
we could do studies. So but understood. I mean, if you could kind of turn down the gravity in your home a little bit, particularly when you're, of an older age, right? And it makes it a little easier for you to move around, right? And kind of, and then you have your home AI kicking in and saying, well, you need to go back to one normal for a little bit of time, right? Oh, okay, but that sort of thing. But, there might be a happy medium in there. But that would be an example of like a high energy, life improvement, extensionary technology in the same way that, one of the things I have in my apartment I was reflecting on is, I have one of these big, what is it? Air filters, right? Okay. And, it sucks it all through and the blue light filtration, all that sort of stuff. But when you think about that, it's an idea, right? That would have been infinitely foreign, right, to probably all living environments within the context of the 50s, 60s, right? And we pick up these things along the way, right? And they make our life better, right? But on the other hand, or better, particularly living in these city environments, right? But they all come about with access to more and more energy, right? I mean,
Well, I mean, with that example, you have something that was probably not initially designed for that, right? But as the base technology, the UV light to kill bacteria, and then implemented in a way packaged with an existing technology. Circulating air, just fairly common, right? For decades, right? It's interesting how those two things come together. And sometimes invention is not necessarily, it's not something that's 100% original. Because, I mean, there might be a case that everything you think is in response to things you've internalized subconsciously, consciously, and then you put them together. Those connections in your mind allowed you to connect two different dots, right? And that's sometimes why you'll see like an invention happen in a field where a person doesn't exist, right? Like an outside field, and whatever they learned in some other field changes the way they view a problem in another field that they may have some advancement in. So, I mean, what's the answer then?
What is the answer? Well, the answer is always evolving in the same way that questions are
always evolving.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a gradient proof.
But going back to the book, The Rational Optimist, right? It's interesting, and I think you made mention the other day that most medieval kings, right. would rather live in a slum in terms of having access to, right? I mean, when you think of the richness of the local bodega where you have everything, right? You have salt, you have sugar, you can have a fresh cut ham sandwich with cheese, right? You can buy some eggs, you can buy some detergent, right? If you have a headache, you can buy some aspirin. I mean, all these things in one place, right?
Right.
And we would both agree that we're not even talking about the greatness of what's to be available, right? But you can get it pretty easily.
Right.
But if you look about, I was reflecting even in our own life, like if you would ask me like back in the 80s, right, what would it be like to be like really, really rich, right? Or maybe even the 90s. I would say sometimes myself, well, maybe I've had a private driver, right? Or maybe I'd have my own airplane, a private jet, right? Or maybe I'd have a personal shopper, and I think a personal shopper particularly being somebody that can, pick out the latest fashion for me, kind of like the Great Gatsby, right? And kind of lay it all out and pack my closet and all that.
Right.
But when you think about it, right, we have all those things now. Right. I can pull out my phone and I can select any type of vehicle to take me anywhere I want. Right. Including taking me to a helipad and flying me somewhere by helicopter if that's required. Right. With a simple NetJets account, again, I can do more of all the same. Right. Without even having to own the jet. And through all these other things, it's Stitch Fix, Rent the Runway, all these different type of applications, right? You can forever be dressed on a subscription basis, right? According to your, you never having to even go into a store, right? And you can have these added economies wherein they're so much cheaper, right? Than having your own driver, having your own aircraft, right? Having your own shopper, right? And is the experience one for one? I don't know, right? But you're almost getting it at a fraction. It's almost like commoditized, right? When you think of how cheap, right, your ability to access, right, this type of stuff is. And that's pretty exciting within one lifetime. Right. Which is not to say internet and, a supercomputer in your pocket and all this other stuff. There's no such thing as a long distance call anymore in practical terms. These have all happened in the same lifetime.
Limitations have been removed, right? But what's interesting is if you saw a king,
sure,
you could talk to a king, let's say King Henry's time, right? And you asked him, are you living the best life possible, right? His perspective, based on what he knew or knows, would probably say yes, because everyone else below him or a peasant or whatever it is, right? And he lives the best possible life of that time, right? But if you were to find someone today who lives maybe like in a bad neighborhood that has access to a bodega, and you ask them how they're doing, and they have everyone, at least in their mind, to look up to, they might say, I don't have a good life, or I do, right?
Sure.
So what's the difference there, right?
What is the difference?
It's perspective.
It is perspective, because to even flip it on its head, right? What do you think of those people 100 years from now looking back on us, right?
Oh yeah.
They probably think we live in a time of hardship in a way that 100 or 150 years back, right? That we think of the factory worker in Manchester or something like that, right? Forever working in poorly lit conditions, and it's all coal dust, and everything is miserable, right? But they in themselves thought they were so much better off than 100 years previous to them, right? And it's very interesting. Like, I was always, sometimes I think about the fact that, as much as we kind of romanticize, I'd love to go back in time, but like when you watch some of those movies, like, it just seems that when you slide backward, right, on the economic development scale, right, there's almost something depressing in it, right? Like, yes, you can romanticize it, right? But inversely, it's kind of like, wow, they really had it. They really had it tough, even if they wouldn't have thought about it that way.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if I think whether something is tough is relative.
Right.
When Babe Ruth picked up a baseball bat for the first time and he tried to hit the ball, it was probably tougher than when he was at his prime, right? There's a really good quote, and it says, "The mind can make heaven out of hell and hell out of heaven," and I think you can see that, right? It's like I remember watching that. What was that movie, Wall Street, with Michael Douglas? Mm-hmm. He was talking about greed and everything. But while he's doing that, he's picking up this brick of a phone, right, which is supposed to be like the cutting edge, and he just like feels empowered, right? He's not like, oh, this is like some ancient prehistoric thing, because it's not, because it's relative, right? And his mind and his perspective is that, you know, this is the latest technology. But I was thinking, okay, if you were of a time, right, even like, let's talk about 2007, not even that far, and, you know, you see the internet is coming out, you see the iPhone is coming out, and pretty much anybody who came up with any sustainable idea and could execute on it, that was anything that was worth anything, right? Like Uber or DoorDash, all these different things that were started could have been very successful, right? Where am I going with this in relationship to what you're saying before? I think the interesting thing is the perspective of the people, right? If your perspective is, I'm looking at the world that's around me now, and it's fine, the technologies are fine, but it can be improved, because I know when I look backwards, I can see that humanity moves forward, it advances on everything that it has and what it does. It puts energy in certain areas. Where am I going to put my energy to then move humanity forward, right? Even if it's delivering a sandwich quicker, you might be delivering that sandwich to the next Albert Einstein that solves the physics issue of the spaceship thing, right? So all those things kind of work together in unison. But I think what you were getting at earlier, which is the perspective of life, you know, I think there are people who would be in King Henry's throne, right? And finally get that piece of chocolate they were waiting for, because they got it from the faraway kingdom, and it was brought on horseback, and a few men died on the journey to bring it back to you. There might be some people in his position that say, I'm living the best life ever. And there's, on the other end, could be people that would say, I hate my life. And there's the whole spectrum. The thing that you can't control is what you're born into, right? If you were born in medieval times or born today or in 1,000 years from now, you can't control it. But the way you view it is within your control. Right? Assuming you have some level of like self-actualization, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
So
added to that, you know, I wonder if, and I say this optimistically, I wonder if, you know, we talk the ability of taking your phone out of the pocket and being able to query up your own private driver in several different types of vehicles, depending on the want or the need, right? But I almost wonder if maybe, knock on wood, 100 years from now, they look back and they think about, you know, how unfortunate, right, that the almost everybody, right, in statistical terms, was confined to one planet. They couldn't go somewhere else, even if they wanted to, right?
Right.
And you can see that further extending over time. I mean, obviously, this is quite an optimistic approach, right? But I mean, could you imagine maybe, you know, knock on wood, whether it be 300 or 1,000 years from now, could you imagine people saying, could you imagine living and dying and only experiencing one solar system?
Right. Or never seeing the world from space.
Or no, but I even push it further. Or only seeing the galaxy from one perspective. Right. It's interesting to think about that in terms of galactic terms, where you would kind of look back and say, in the same way that we would say, you know, sit here and kind of go, could you imagine like living your whole life and never ever having an economic or otherwise ability to leave your own village, right? And we would look at that in that terms, right? What a limitation, right?
Right.
Not even
Wait, there's more. To listen to the next part of this episode, please follow the platform catalog.